I grew up here in San Diego, California, to a family of religious Sephardic Israeli parents. My father's side is Yemenite, my mother's side is Moroccan, both Israeli. My father came to the United States to do his PhD in electronic warfare, radar defense, stuff that I don't really understand. I'm just the rabbi in the family. And my parents raised me in a very natural, organic Jewish home. We were observant, we kept Torah mitzvot, we were involved in what others would call the regular world. I received a regular Jewish day school education in a Chavetz Chaim, that's a Litvish kind of day school. I went to the local Chabad synagogue, that's what we have in our neighborhood. My parents were instrumental in beginning that Chabad synagogue. And I was raised in a pretty, what others might call a regular American Orthodox Jewish community. At a certain point in time, I had to decide where I was going to go for high school. San Diego had very limited options for post-elementary school, middle school education. And I had become very close friends with somebody who was a yeshiva student in Ner Israel in Baltimore. Ner Israel was a well-known yeshiva. It's been around since 1933. And after initially struggling with the idea of, am I going to leave home? Am I going to stay in San Diego? What about my friends? What about my community? What about my family? I'm 13 years old, going on 14. The distance from San Diego to Baltimore, where the yeshiva was, is a 6-hour flight. It would mean coming home to see my mother and father 3 times a year, maybe 4 times a year if I was lucky. And I went there for an interview, and not even sure if the 3 pages, not dapim, pages, like it's a daf and a half of Talmud that I had studied in my entire 8th grade would be sufficient to even get me into a yeshiva where people had finished masechtot before they even got there. And I went and I applied and I stayed for a Shabbat, and Baruch Hashem, I was accepted, and my journey began. My journey of pursuing higher Torah learning began in Baltimore. I spent 5 years of my life there. I served my sentence. And in those 5 years, I was zocheh, I merited to learn an unbelievable amount of Torah compared to what I've studied before. But there was something about that experience that wasn't right for me. I'm sure that it's right for other people. But for me, it was a different kind of Judaism than one that I had grown up with. Yes, we had secular studies in the yeshiva. That was obligatory. It's the law of the country. But secular studies were not treated the same way Judaic studies were. And most definitely they were not treated the same way that my parents had raised me to treat and respect secular studies. The thought of having a career, of getting a job, you should know most graduates of the yeshiva have careers and jobs and go into the world. But the strength, the push, the emphasis was not on the side of the world that involved being engaged in society, but about living in a Jewish community, living in a bubble, being involved only with your own kind of people. One of the straws that broke the camel's back for me was the attitude towards the state of Israel. I know when I was in the UK and I mentioned a line from Rabbi Yechia ben Arosh, who said that somebody who is not a Zionist is not Jewish, and I heard that I made some waves when I said that, and I'm not pushing this agenda on anybody right now. But I had grown up in a proudly Zionistic home, in a home where we had family members who fell for the founding of the state of Israel, a home in which my cousins and my family members all served proudly in Tzahal, in the Israeli Defense Force. My parents, my father who was a high-ranking officer in the Israeli Navy, my mother who also served her time for the state of Israel. I grew up in a home where Yom HaAtzmaut, Yom Yerushalayim, Israeli songs that they probably don't sing in Israel anymore were in my blood. And then I came to yeshiva, and I'll never forget that day. You might remember that day, but Ilan Ramon was the first Israeli astronaut in space. And Ilan Ramon had tragically passed away, died in space. I had just been in San Diego for a Shabbaton, and we were all crying. It was a really emotional time. And we all had this vision of, wow, Israel made it to them. Where else can Israel go? Israel made it to space. And we were crying. It was a devastating loss for us as young people in San Diego. And I made it to yeshiva. And in yeshiva, the Rosh Yeshiva got up and spoke. He said, I know that many people here are shaken up about what happened to Ilan Ramon. And I quote, he said, Ilan Ramon was not a Jewish hero. He was an Israeli hero, but not a Jewish hero. And it's the first time in my life hearing from somebody who I respected as a Talmid Chacham that there is somehow a difference between Judaism and Israelis. And I'm certain that my juvenile understanding of the state of Israel and the challenges of the state of Israel that later I developed in my life were juvenile at the time. But I felt challenged. I felt this is totally different than anything that I had been raised with. I'm not getting into a slew of other issues. A slew of other issues that came up over the years. But ultimately I felt myself facing this decision of, do I really belong in the religious Jewish world? Do I really belong in the world of yeshivot where people don't think like me and they don't talk like me and they don't believe in the same things that I believe in? Maybe the things that I believe in are not correct. Maybe I have to challenge the things that I was raised on. And I spent my 5 years there asking all those questions until ultimately it led me to a place of making the painful decision to leave a yeshiva that I thought I would stay in, finish university in, and continue on in. And it just wasn't working for me. And I began searching for a place. I was Sephardic. I wasn't really exposed to so much of being Sephardic as a young San Diegan, aside from maybe cultural elements of that world. And I set out to look for yeshiva, and I heard of Sephardic yeshiva in Jerusalem, in the old city. I remember telling my rabbis that I was going to go there, and they thought I was crazy. What do you leave a normal yeshiva to go to some crazy Sephardic place that we never heard of before? And the things we did hear about it, and the people who graduated from there, and Hashem Yishmo, what we heard. And I said, listen, I have nothing to lose. I'm going to go to Israel. It's an Israeli yeshiva. It's Sephardic. It's different. Maybe it's a different world. And I came to this yeshiva. I remember I landed in Israel 11 o'clock at night. I showed up in the old city of Jerusalem with my suitcase. There wasn't even a sign on the yeshiva for me to know where to look for the yeshiva. I did not know at that time that I had met the most dysfunctional Jewish institution I would ever be a part of in my life. I come into the yeshiva. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. Hi, I'm the new student. Nobody knows who I am. There's not a room for me. I put a mattress on the floor and I slept my first night there. Pirkei Avot. It says you'll sleep on the earth. Mamash, I slept on the earth. And then came the next day, and 2 culture shocks happened to me. I met both Rashi Yeshiva. The first one, Rabbi Shlomo Katzin, shall live and be well. I met him by Shacharit. He looked like a Rosh Yeshiva. But I went later to ask him a question in his office. He had a white shirt on and his sleeves rolled up, no suit jacket, no Hamburg. And what kind of Rosh Yeshiva is this? Which Rosh Yeshiva rolls up his sleeves in front of his students in the middle of the day? I had been in a yeshiva where when you knock on the rabbi's door, you wait 5 minutes for him to put on all the proper gear before he opens the door for you. And already in my pre-programmed, is that what he said? My pre-programmed mind, I knew that this couldn't possibly be a Rosh Yeshiva I could learn from. Such foolishness today. I regret my sins today. But then came the killer, and that was the shiur of Mori HaRav Yaakov Peretz. Should live and be well. I sat in his shiur, and he was teaching us Torah. And it was fascinating on an intellectual level, but it hurt. Because he was so wrong. How could somebody so smart be so wrong? How did he not understand Shulchan Aruch properly? How did he not know what normal Jews do? And it was day 1, and day 2, and day 3, and day 4, and about 2 or 3 weeks in the yeshiva, I told my friend, hey, I'm just going to get up and leave. This is not the place for me. The Rosh Yeshiva is crazy. Who does he think he is to argue with Rabbi Ovadia Yosef? He doesn't know he's Sephardic. And at that moment, I had to deal with another set of stigmas that I had developed while I was trying not to develop stigmas in yeshiva. And my friend told me, he said, you know what bothers you so much about him? It's that he's telling you things that challenge everything that you had been told until today. And you can do 2 things. You could be a coward and run, or you can give it a chance. You can give it a chance and listen, because maybe he's right. I listened, I sat, and I have never left that Beit Midrash since. Never. But I needed someone to tell me that. I needed someone to tell me that I had permission to think about my Judaism for myself. To not live constantly in fear of other people or the community or where I was raised or what I'm supposed to be or the ethnicity I belong to, whatever it would be. Someone had to grant me the permission to take my own Judaism seriously enough that just like anything else in the world, I think for myself, I learn for myself, I reach my own conclusions. Why does my Torah, why does my connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu deserve any less than that?